Hello, and welcome to San Lindo Soundwave. I'm Tom Penny, and this is week 18, day 88, and today we are reading from the book of Joshua, chapter 6. Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out, and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound the long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse, and the army will go up, everyone straight in." So Joshua, son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, "Take up the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and have 7 priests carry trumpets in front of it." And then he ordered the army, "Advance, march around the city with an armed guard going ahead of the ark of the Lord." When Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests, carrying 7 trumpets before the Lord, went forward, blowing their trumpets, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. The armed guard marched ahead of the priests, who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed the ark. All this time the trumpets were sounding, but Joshua had commanded the army, "Do not give a war cry. Do not raise your voices. Do not say a word until the day I tell you to shout. Then shout." So we had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once. Then the army returned to camp and spent the night there. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests, carrying the 7 trumpets, went forward. They marched before the ark of the Lord, and blowing the trumpets. The armed men were ahead of them, and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord, while the trumpets kept sounding. So on the 2nd day, they marched around the city once and returned to camp. They did this for 6 days. On the 7th day, they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day they circled the city 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priest sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the army, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. The city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab, the prostitute, and all who are with her in her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies we sent. But keep away from the devoted things, so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise, you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury. When the trumpets sounded, the army shouted, and the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. They devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword everything in it, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, and donkeys. Joshua said to the 2 men who had spied out the land, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out and all who belong to her, in accordance with your oath to her." So the young man who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother, her brothers and sisters, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. Then they burned the whole city and everything in it, but they put the silver and the gold and the articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, because she had the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho. And she lives among the Israelites to this day. At that time, Joshua pronounced this solemn oath: "Cursed before the Lord is the one who undertakes to rebuild this city, Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn son, he will lay its foundations. At the cost of his youngest, he will set up its gates." So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land. And now let's read and reflect on our 7 arrows, or 7 questions. Number 1, what does this passage say? Number 2, what does this passage mean to its original audience? Number 3, what does this passage tell us about God? Number 4, what does this passage tell us about humanity? Number 5, what does this passage demand of me? Number 6, how does this passage change the way I relate to people? And number 7, what does this passage prompt me to pray to God? Now let's read a brief devotional about this passage from our book, The 7 Arrows. The story of the fall of Jericho is very familiar to many people. It often makes its way into children's Bible story books and songs. It represents a defining moment for the nation of Israel, as well as a vivid picture of God's power at work on behalf of His people. The city of Jericho was important for Israel since it sat on the edge of the Promised Land, and the inhabitants of the city were the first that Israel would drive out of the land. It is clear from the tactics God used to destroy Jericho that He was ensuring the glory for any victory would go to Him and not to Israel. No military strategist would have drawn up the battle plan. Marching around a city, blowing trumpets and shouting, sounded like a strange approach indeed. That is, unless you understand the point. God ensured the credit for the victory went to Him, and He desired that the outcome of the victory would result in His people trusting Him. Since they followed the strange battle plan and trusted God, the city was destroyed and Israel was victorious. If only they would continue to follow this pattern over and over again, they would certainly drive out the inhabitants in the land and live in safety. Thanks for joining us today, and hope you will join us again tomorrow.